This is the most unique time in history. It really feels like we're going back to the 1800s when people came to Seattle in the beginning of the city's incorporation and the statehood, and they were getting outfitted to go up to Alaska to find gold. We're now talking about kind of prospecting and pioneering and getting into all these single family lots, converting them to multifamily, essentially allowing 3 dwelling units on every single family lot. And how do we figure out how to get there? How do we figure out how to mine that potential? Does it make sense? Is the highest and best use to do 2 units, 3 units, combine with a neighboring property, do 4, do a subdivision, then add houses, then add accessory dwelling units, then condominiumize? You have all these stages and phases, and it's opening up a whole new thing when you have a state mandate that tells all the cities that they have to allow for 3 dwelling units or more in their single family lots. It's a crazy time. We've never gone through anything like this before. A little bit of history. So, again, I'm Terrence Wilson, Wilson Law Group. I started in this industry back in 1996. Almost 30 years ago now, I took a job working for my father-in-law, who was a land surveyor. He's retired now. Back then, in the 1990s, a lot of land use codes were changing, and it was getting more difficult for surveyors to get subdivisions and boundary line adjustments and other types of projects through because they were spending a lot of time with the permitting process. And so I got hired in that era because it was a time of bringing on planners and project managers and people to help go back and forth with the various jurisdictions. It gave me a really unique vantage point coming to work for a survey company and dealing with all the jurisdictions in the greater Puget Sound area. You got to see all the little nuances of how Seattle does it. How does the city of Kent do it? How does Renton do it? How does Bellevue do it? They all had some overlaps in the ways that they did things, and I learned a ton. And one thing that I realized in all of those early years in the 90s is that it always seemed like it was the lawyer that got the final say, because the engineer and the surveyor and the planner all kind of had these ideas, but in the end they were trying to evaluate codes, what's allowed, what's not allowed, how do you get through this process to get to this result. And it was always about codes and legal interpretation. So I decided to go to Seattle University in 2001. And at that time, my father-in-law also kind of went into retirement, and I decided I would take over the land surveying business. Tough timing because I had just started law school, and Seattle U offered the night program, so I did law school at night from 2001 to 2004 and ran the survey business by day. Graduated with my law degree and continued to work on all these subdivisions, started buying property of my own, building houses or paying people to build houses for me, dealt with a lot of grandfather lots and boundary line adjustments, short plats and things like that, and thought after I graduated law school in 2004 and passed the bar, I would never really need to practice law. And another 4 years went by because the market was doing great in my mind anyways. We were going gangbusters in the 2000s, and as anyone who was in the industry knows, back in those 2000s, it was a house of cards. And it all came to a crash in 2008. And at that time, the survey business started to hit a brick wall. Most of my clients were infill developers doing small little short plats, 2 lots, 3 lots, 4 lots, 5 lots. And I thought my world was coming to an end. We had 30 people in the survey business. We scaled all the way down over the next 3 years to 10 people from 2008 to 2011. And it didn't look like it was going to sustain itself. So I reached out to another larger survey engineering company, and we basically folded our business into theirs. And they took on my staff, they took on my clients, and I took a step back to reflect, maybe I should do the law thing after all of this and start building that, but I had never worked in a law firm before. So from 2011 on, I've been full-born going into the law side of it. And at first, I was dealing mostly with the same infill developers who were doing these subdivisions. They needed CC&Rs, sometimes projects needed HOAs, various jurisdictions had all these different covenants and easements. There were still neighbor issues and purchase and sale agreement issues and all these things. And we just started to develop organically my law firm. I added a couple more staff, and we developed it. And then we got to about 8 or 9 people about 5 years ago. And all of this new explosion that we're talking about today started to go gangbusters. And it was such an interesting right place at right time for me, because as we're hearing about today, the condominiumization of ownership is very similar to a subdivision. And learning what all the different jurisdictions do in terms of how they review subdivisions, and now knowing that we're doing condominiums on all of these single family lots, it's a kind of wild, wild west revolution, because in full circle, I was brought into this industry in the 90s because of all the bureaucracy. But now we've almost removed all of it, because you go in and get your building permit, the condominiumization is just the lawyer and the surveyor making maps and a declaration to record the condominium. So in a sense, the thing that brought me into the industry is now the thing that we as lawyers and as surveyors are being tasked with all of that planning duty. How do you design separate ownership in such a way that it's going to work well? Well, you use all your knowledge about how subdivisions work and you ask those questions. How is this site going to function when it's owned by different people? Now, a year ago, I got invited to go to Montana, and I grew up here in Skyway area in Renton, went to Renton High School in the 80s. Very urban guy. Montana sounded like the most boring place and a place I would never want to go, but I grudgingly went. And a couple things happened to me while I was there. This was only 1 year ago. One is that I realized putting my laptop away and my phone away for a little while and going down the Yellowstone River and doing some fly fishing, things I had never done before, actually was very therapeutic. And I bought a couple Western shirts and some cowboy boots, and I thought, wow, this kind of is just making me feel very much like I'm up in the mountains, I'm in the wild, wild west. And I came back to work when I got back and I realized, wait a minute, this is what real estate is right now. This is the wild, wild west. I've been doing this almost 30 years, and everybody that I knew that came before me and the way they talked about it, this is the most unique time in history. It really feels like we're going back to the 1800s when people came to Seattle in the beginning of the cities and corporation and the statehood, and they were getting outfitted to go up to Alaska to find gold. We're now talking about kind of prospecting and pioneering and getting into all these single family lots, converting them to multifamily, essentially allowing 3 dwelling units on every single family lot. And how do we figure out how to get there? How do we figure out how to mine that potential? Does it make sense? Is the highest and best use to do 2 units, 3 units, combine with a neighboring property, do 4, do a subdivision, then add houses, then add accessory dwelling units, then condominiumize? You have all these stages and phases. And it's opening up a whole new thing when you have a state mandate that tells all the cities that they have to allow for 3 dwelling units or more in their single family lots. It's a crazy time. We've never gone through anything like this before. So in a lot of sense, I've looked at it like I came back and I said, I'm going to grow this beard. I never had a beard. If you go back and look at videos from me from a year and a half ago, clean cut guy, sport coat, had the tie on, doing what I thought was the lawyer thing. I've completely just shed all of that now. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to embrace that this is a whole new time of sort of prospecting and mining and pioneering, and I'm going to go with this whole Western garb. I started listening to country music. My kids thought I went crazy. I started playing country music on the guitar. I'm doing live gigs now on the side. Like I've fully bought into this whole aura of like, let's keep our mindset in this sort of pioneering, paradigm shifting sense. And so it's helpful for me to just look in the mirror and see in my own physical body what I'm trying to implement in terms of the way that I approach business now, which is that we're in unprecedented times, and it's time to start thinking about things in a new way. Sometimes it's challenging for people that have been in the industry for 30 years. They've got preconceived notions for what a condo is, what an HOA is, how these things work. And they sometimes have difficulty seeing it through a new lens. Sometimes it's easier to bring somebody into the industry who's never been in this industry before and teach them from scratch where we're at. Because while there is helpful information from real estate in past ways that things have been dealt with, this is a time that requires new tools, new education, and new way of looking at things. So let's start with a couple things here and make sure that I'm working this properly. There's an important distinction I want to make here about something that happened back in 2018. It doesn't get talked about very often, but it's important for a variety of reasons. I'm just going to touch on a couple of them. One, it's the new code in 2018 that predates all the stuff we're talking about here today with DADUs and ADUs and House bills, but it was what's called the Washington Uniform Common Interest Ownership Act, RCW 6490. We call it WCIWA, which is just the acronym for the name of the act. WCIWA said we had a whole chapter in our RCWs up until 2018 that was for condos. It was the old 6434 chapter, and then we had a subdivision chapter. We're going to, after 2018, we're going to move all that stuff into the past, and we're going to bring all condominiums and all subdivisions and all their forms of communities that we're creating under one part of the code. Now, certain things apply to condos still within the code that are different, that don't apply maybe to others, but it was a meaningful start at sort of blurring the lines between subdivisions and condos. Because it's a statewide code, and it says if you create a condominium or you create a subdivision of any kind after 2018, it's going to be found in that part of the code now. So the language that's in there about the variety of legal things that affect those different types of communities is now under one thing, and that predated really this gangbuster DADU thing that started going into effect 2019, 2020. And it's an important distinction to make there because one thing that's in that code is it says jurisdictions are not allowed to treat the condominium different than another form of ownership. What does that mean? That means if it's one lot and you go in to get a building permit to build 3 dwelling units on it, the jurisdiction cannot not then say when you go to condominiumize it, oh, well, now we're going to impose this on it. We're going to give you new restrictions and requirements. Condominiums are not reviewed by the jurisdiction. They're privately done by the surveyor and by the attorney. They get recorded at the county records. The assessor is going to look at it and give it a new tax parcel number and give it a new value. It is not reviewed by the jurisdiction. And they're prohibited from imposing impediments on it. And the new House bills that were signed that went into effect last summer also say, at least 1337, which deals with the DADUs and ADUs, says that the jurisdictions are not allowed to prohibit the condominiumization of these units. So it's at least in the politicians' minds, in the codes that have been created to sort of give the condominium some free rein in being able to be creative about ownership. And that has become game-changing because in 2018, 2019, as the first few DADUs and ADUs started getting condominiumized, the first few guinea pigs that came through found out that when they put these on the market, the buyer did not care that it had an HOA, did not care that it was considered a condominium, whether or not it was a single family on the building permit or whether it was an accessory dwelling unit on the building permit was not affecting the marketing. And very quickly you started to see more people getting into the market in that regard. And you also saw a shift from the people that were doing the townhomes and the row houses and all the multifamily zone projects were coming into the single family neighborhoods. Now saying I can go to West Seattle, I can go up onto, I can go into Capitol Hill, I can go up to Green Lake, I can go in all these neighborhoods that were previously single family zones and not allowed to be subdivided, and I can build 3 dwelling units and just use the condo and essentially subdivide without subdividing. So I think we've talked enough about why opportunities, and I won't belabor some of those things, but some of the numbers that were in the previous session for Keen's breakout, I know people saw this one over their head. One example he gave was a $400,000 to $500,000 profit on one project, and the other one had a $700,000 profit on the project through the creative use of the condominiumization and the lending and building options that are available. But one of the big reasons that is why condo is it creates value. It creates net worth. What is a condo? So on its very face of it, condominiums, it's important to understand condominiums are just a form of ownership. So they on a map, they're going to have one of 3 different features on it. Either the unit is going to be on a map, and I'll have examples of this in a moment, and the slides will be available again to everybody afterwards. It's going to have the unit, which could be the traditional high-rise condominium where your space is the walls in. That might be your unit. But more frequently, what we're talking about in the DADU, ADU world is what we call airspace condos. It's a boundary that starts on the ground and it goes up in the air, and it's just like a subdivision. When you look at one of those maps, it looks like a subdivision map because the unit of the condo has nothing to do with what's inside that space. That space could be vacant. You might have condominiumized a vacant piece of ground. You might have condominiumized a single family home. You might have condominiumized an accessory dwelling unit, or a duplex or a triplex. The underlying type of product or feature or thing that is built on the ground has nothing to do with when something is called a condo. That's one of the first big paradigm shifters for people to have, is that in their mind they think, when I hear the word condo, I think about high-rise. I think about walls in. I think about an HOA that has to maintain elevators and walkways and hallways. That's not what we're talking about in most of these ADU situations. We're talking about units. They might have some common elements. Those are typically going to be things like a driveway that everybody shares, maybe a walkway or maybe a place to put your trash. But it's also important to understand that these features, while in your building permit, you may have had to look at certain things to build. When you go to divide these areas out, the jurisdiction's not reviewing the condo map, so they're not necessarily thinking, the jurisdiction's not thinking when they're giving you your building permits, how is this property going to interact with itself when it's all owned by different people? That's something you need to think about when you're putting together your condominium. Is the jurisdiction is not going to review this, so I need to put my planner hat on and ask questions like, how are walkways going to be used? How are driveways going to be used? Where's my parking going to go? There might have been only 1 parking stall required for the building permit, but you might want to put a second or a third in order to serve the accessory dwelling units. Because they weren't required by code does not mean you can't add them. So you have to start thinking about site elements, and so that's where we have the units are what you own, And then the common elements are what are shared by everybody. And then the limited common elements are things that are shared by less than the whole. So that could be something like a parking stall or a bicycle storage area or something that not everybody gets to use. But it's still not part of someone's unit. It's a shared space of some kind or an assignable space. So here's a picture, and we've been looking at a few of these. And one of the things I want to point out on this that I love about this slide and hearing today about 2 days ago, the city announcing that their companion legislation coming next year is proposing to allow DADUs to be 1,500 square feet. That's a big deal because in this example here, what somebody did is they took an older home, and it says DADU up there, but ignore that DADU symbol for a second and just imagine this was one house, might have been 100 years old, that's on one big rectangular lot. They classified that single family home that had been around for 100 years as a DADU in this building permit process because it was a 1,000 square foot older home. And then they went and got a permit for a duplex, and they called one half of the duplex the single family and one half the attached accessory dwelling unit, the AADU. And by reclassifying the older house that used to be the single family home on the property into the DADU, and then building one building that has a duplex, 2 units in it, and calling one the single family and one called the AADU, they met all the code requirements because the City of Seattle says you can have 3 dwelling units, but one has to be attached to the primary. So since the primary on the site originally is being converted into a DADU, then our primary down here doesn't have to be any bigger. I don't know if I'm losing my power. Don't need it. I'm loud enough. The primary doesn't have to be any different size than the accessory dwelling unit. They can be mirror images of one another. There's no size restriction in terms of There's no size restriction in terms of how small to make the single family. At first, when these came in 2018, 2019, the developer community said, I'm going to build the biggest that I can for the primary, and the primary in Seattle was based on 50% of the lot size was your floor area ratio. So if you had a 5,000 square foot lot, they would make a 2,500 square foot primary. And then they could go up to 1,000 for the accessories. So they did that. And that was the first paradigm. That primary house would sell for $1.7, $2 million. The DADU was selling for $800, $900, and that was the paradigm. And with the interest rates going up and other constraints economically, they found that the $800,000 to $900,000 product was selling a lot faster than the $2 million product in a lot of the neighborhoods. So a lot of the developers went to this kind of model and said, I'm going to just do an arrangement where these are all selling for $1 million, 1.1, 1.2, or 8 or 900 or whatever it might be, and capture more of the market in that sense of who can afford these things, and not just necessarily build the biggest thing that I can, but build what's appropriate for what the market would demand in that particular neighborhood. But I bring all that up to say here a couple of things. One is that if we go to 1,500 square feet, that's going to open up a huge opportunity for a lot more homes out there that are historically on these properties that are around that size right now that could be classified as the DADU, an original old single-family home just being classified on the building plans as a DADU, and then going and building 2 more dwelling units on the property that are going to be considered the single family and the other accessory dwelling unit. So that's one point of showing you that. And then using the condo, if you know what you're going to build and you know it's going to fit, or maybe you've gone and gotten the permits, and so you know it's approved, you don't have to wait till you've built. You can condo off the existing structure as one of the units and sell it. Recover a lot of the initial capital that maybe you put into the project to get into it in the first place, and then just focus on finishing up building out the rest. So it's one of the things as a takeaway that I want people to understand here is that the condominiumization can be done at any time, and it doesn't matter what's built or not built. There is wisdom in waiting until you have a permit, because if you sell something and then you go to get your permit and the permit is tied to the overall site and you can't build what you went in to get a permit on without then re-engaging the site you've already sold, you might have problems if somebody else has already bought a unit and now they have a loan and you can't move lines around or do additional easements and things like that. So it's important to kind of know that the site plan is set and is going to work, but if you're confident in that, you can literally condo, the process of condoing and selling off those units at any time, whether or not something's built or not. But this also illustratively shows those 3 components I said. There's a unit. There's an example of that existing home that was converted into a DADU, and you see that it's got, in color there, it's got some area of its unit on both sides of the walkway. So again, this is another paradigm shift where people think of condos as walls-in ownership, but you're looking here at what looks like to be more like a subdivided lot, split down the middle by a walkway. That subdivided lot or that condominiumized lot includes the building. It includes whatever else is in that colored area, which could be other stairways, walkways, other features, yard, whatever it is, rockeries, landscaping. The unit of the condo is that blue space. That means that square footage is also not going to have anything to do with the size of the building, the livable square footage. That size of the lot or the condo unit, however you want to refer to it, it's the horizontal space the surveyor draws up. So if it's a 5,000 square foot lot and that's about 2,400 square feet or something like that, and the building itself is only 1,000 or 1,500, you have to understand square footages mean different things for different elements. If we're talking about the condo unit, it's that whole space in color. If we're talking about the marketable living space, that's the interior space. That's not the condo unit. That just happens to be the structure that's inside the condo unit that's been created on the survey map. Important to make those distinctions in terms of what is a condo unit, what is the dwelling unit, and what are the square footages. Here's another unit here, smaller unit, part of the duplex, half of that. It's got a little bit of yard in the front, a little bit of yard in the back, and then the building itself with a shared party wall. And then the other one, mirror image right next to it. And that comprises all the units in a typical 3-unit ADU, single family type of construction. Then we have common elements. This is that walkway area. And down below, maybe some trash storage area for the staging of the day for pickup, or maybe that's where they store it all week long. All these different things are part of the design criteria when you think through how to do this. And remembering, again, no one else is going to look at this but you, your surveyor, and your attorney. There is no municipal review. This is just wise, best practice, thinking through how does a site work well when it's owned by different people rather than all being under one ownership. And then we have limited common elements. In this case, there were 3 different parking stalls. Again, only 1 stall required by the city for permitting for the primary home. No parking requirements for the accessory dwelling units, but made sense to put 3. We had room for them. So let's put 3 and we'll have them be limited common elements and we'll assign them. Some of our developers say, I want to make all 3 parking stalls, but I don't want to say who gets them yet because I'm going to go to market. And then for the people who want them, they can pay me the extra 50 grand or 100 grand to have a unit that comes with a parking stall. And if they don't, then I'll offer it on another unit. And so maybe it's going to be assigned at a later time. In the meantime, it's listed there as a limited common element. The developer may or may not be assigning those ahead of time, or they might wait until they have a buyer who wants to pay for it. So I already talked about you can condo almost anything. I gave a presentation last week and one of the students said, I can condo my pencil. And I said, yes, you're onto something here. Because it's important for everyone to get rid of the thought in their mind that a condo means any type of structure. It's not a high rise. It's not a duplex. It's not any type of structure. You can condominiumize a parking lot. You can condominiumize a boat marina. If you go on to the MLS right now, you'll see people selling boat slips for $100,000, $150,000. And it says, hey, boat slip for a 30-foot boat. And you got this dock area, and there's a locker room, and there's a place for you to take a shower, and there's a little common area with a TV room. It's just a condominium. They made units for the boat slips, and then they made common elements for the walkways and docks, and then they made limited common elements for lockers and maybe common elements for the shared TV rooms and bathrooms and so forth. And so condominium is not the structure or the land or anything. It's just a form of ownership. If you remember that, that'll help you with a lot of the confusion that comes in. It's just a form of ownership. It sits on top of whatever is there or will be there in the future. And so what's it take to record a condo, to make a condo? It's really quite simple in terms of what is involved. First, you are going to form an HOA or incorporate an HOA. So as a logistical matter, there's that entity sitting there, and it can then be referred to in 2 documents that get legally recorded to create the condo, which is number 1, a survey map. There has to be a picture with dimensions. It says this is what I'm getting in my condo. Where are the units, where are the common spaces, the common elements, and where are the limited common elements. The second thing is a set of CC&Rs, a declaration. Declaration and a condo map work in tandem. They point to one another. They each have a recording number space at the records that says this declaration points to the survey map, and this survey map points to the declaration. They get recorded, and there's your condo. Now, if you're going to sit on these and rent them out, and you just want to create that extra value because your appraised value of one lot that had 3 dwelling units on it versus 3 separate things that are separately taxed and separately valued is going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars in difference. So even if you're going to keep them, you may want to take advantage of striking while the iron is hot and do the condominium now, have that value. Yes, you're going to pay more property taxes, but why are you paying more property taxes? Because the value of the property went up. That's the whole point. We're creating higher value on the property, even if you're not going to sell them. And if that's all you're going to do, you're done. You created the condo. You're going to get your own tax parcel numbers in the future. If you want to manipulate selling one, keeping one, selling two, keeping one, renting them out, whatever you want to do. If you want to get your financing creativity and move loans and HELOCs and different things around based on the fact that you have 3 of something now rather than 1 of something that happens to have 3 dwelling units on it, you've now created the condo, but that's all you need to do if you're not selling. If you're going to sell, then there are other aspects of the condominium that you're going to want to entertain working on. And so I want to mention a couple things before we get into what's left to do if you're going to sell. First is that we've talked a little bit today about the fact that City of Seattle has some shared utility issues to deal with. And it was mentioned that there are sub-meter arrangements that are used. And let me check my time real quick too, Cole. 3 minutes. All right. We're going to buzz past this and just say you already know that in some cases you need to accommodate something that shares the utilities if you have something that's shared. And there's very easy ways to do that. There is an association. Most of these associations, and we've done thousands of them, have 2 or 3 things in their budget. A $10 fee for the annual renewal with the Secretary of State, an insurance payment, and possibly making a tax return filing, which has no cost to it, but it's one task. So 2 or 3 tasks, a couple of small payments to be made. This will be in the slides for you guys to look at later, but they're depending on how many common elements there are and whether or not there are shared walls. These are some breakdowns of some of the different budgets for these, so you can see how much it is for the HOA annually and how much it is per unit based on how many are in there. And again, you can review these slides later on. The other things that you will need just to be aware of is if you're going to sell, you provide a public offering statement. Public offering statement is going to disclose the condo map, the declaration, any bylaws, any rules, the budget, all these different kinds of things so that a buyer knows what they're getting into. Moving forward here, there is an implied warranty of quality. So one of the big impediments to the condo movement in the beginning was people's fear that that they were all going to come with all this extra liability because we've heard a lot of stories about condominium ownership coming with all these construction defects and the ambulance chasing that went on with a lot of the developers. There is a 4-year limited warranty of quality from the time of the conveyance of each deed on a new condominium creation. So that just means for the next 4 years, if the windows are leaking, the roof is leaking, the developer is going to be responsible for any major features that need to be repaired. So it is something to distinguish there as something to be aware of and be ready to handle. I've talked to, as I mentioned to the earlier group, I've talked to the construction defect attorneys in Seattle to ask with these thousands and thousands of projects that have been going on now, how many of them are you getting construction defect ones? And they've said none. They haven't gotten any construction defect claims in terms of lawsuits like they do in the high-rise scenario. Because it's so if you do a flip on the front, I won't get into the weeds on this too much. It's still everything that you've created in the condo is a new condo now. So even if it's a 100-year-old home, it's a new condo. But you can put in the purchase and sale agreement an agreement with the buyer that certain things in an older home are being taken as is, and so you can carve out. There are some provisions in the code that allow you to do that. But the bottom line is it's 4 years on everything, whether it's old or new. That's coming by default. So I won't get into property taxes, but just like in subdivisions, it takes the assessor a little bit of time to get the taxes updated. So everybody will have to have a proration on the existing bill until such time as they get their own bill. Usually within the first year or so, you're going to get your own bill. You're going to get all new tax parcel numbers, all new valuations. Different examples here. On the left-hand side is your clean-cut dadu in the backyard, single family in the front, line through the middle, no shared spaces. Next one here is in the middle is your typical, got a walkway or driveway or some feature that's shared, and then 2 units that are connected, 1 unit that's not, kind of like that other example we showed earlier. Over on the far right, you can see an example for Seattle, for example, in the RSL zones, they allow density calculations that allow you to make however many units you can. They might be single families or dadus, but they're all separately detached, and you can see how we condominiumized around 5 units that are over there with some parking and trash and so forth over there. So just different examples of how these look. Picture of this was shown by Brendan Nunes earlier, but I just want to give a takeaway here as we wrap up the time that people ask, well, what can I do on my lot? I'm not a feasibility guy in general because architects and designers are going to look at a lot of stuff, but I've seen so many of these that I know a lot of the general provisions, and what I can say that's cool about something like this example here is a project in North Seattle, a single family 5,000 zone, an old grandfather lot that's only 3,400 square feet. There's thousands of these out there. They were divided before the current rules, and so they're small, they're substandard. But they're still allowed to be built on, and they still can have 3 dwelling units on it. This lot was 34 feet wide by 100 feet deep. That's 3,400 square feet. And just imagine for a second if a 34-foot wide lot by a 100-foot deep lot can fit 3 dwelling units on them. 2 of the front ones are the attached ones, that is the single family and the attached, are 3 stories tall with rooftop decks with views of the city. And then the back one is the detached, that's a standard 2-story detached accessory dwelling unit. All of them selling for just under, the accessory dwelling is a little smaller, so for just under $1 million, and the one that was the single family in the front there that did have the one garage stall sold for I think 1.2 or 1.3. So almost $3 million in sales on a property that they paid $400,000 to buy and maybe put into it about 1.5 in building costs. So they maybe made 500 to $1 million depending on how they netted out after the closing costs. But that's on a 3,400 square foot lot. If you have a 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 square foot lot, like so many thousands of lots throughout the Seattle area are, that just shows you what you can do on that size of a lot. Imagine what you can do with your creativity on other lots.
I got one word for you. That is yeehaw! Everybody, let's win the yeehaw.